and then the ones that are being used a lot get strengthened, which is why anything we learn in our teenage years we become really good at. You see these kids, they pick up the guitar, and 6 months later they're playing really well, and that's because the brain is actually shaping itself around everything that we do. This whole process of neural reshaping, or neural pruning they call it, is mediated by neurotransmitters that are very similar to marijuana. Marijuana imitates them, and so when people smoke marijuana, it disrupts this process, and it disrupts it throughout the brain. So when they look at brain scans of people who smoked marijuana in their teenage years, which unfortunately I did, what they find is that they have less gray matter, which is what we need to think, that the white matter is more disorganized. It's pretty global, and it's associated with worse memory, less clear thinking, worse impulse control. And it has major effects. The biggest effect is on education. Teenagers who smoke marijuana, if they start using before 16 and use it all regularly, they've got twice the dropout rate of non-users.
Wow.
They do worse in school.
Let me take a break because we have one of those mandatory breaks. But again, in your book, a whole chapter here on what research tells us about teenage use, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. But also, what about an individual that is using marijuana and driving down the road? It's no different than alcohol, is it? Let's talk about that. And of course, we'll get into some of the other aspects of policy as well. This is a new book out, just coming out, Marijuana Debunked. Dr. Ed Gogek with us. We'll continue our conversation with him. Then we'll open up the phones to get your comments. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, as we move further into this political campaign season, we'll see the liberal mind at work. Dr. Lau Rossiter, a forensic psychiatrist, has written about the liberal mindset, and we see lots of evidence of its impact on politicians and voters. Here are a few of the attributes of the liberal mind that he has discovered. It does not preach an ethic of self-reliance or self-determination. It does not advocate moral rectitude or understand the critical role of morality in human relating. It does not celebrate genuine altruism of private charity. It is focused on the poor and victimized while ignoring the possibility that they may bear responsibility for their plight. This is just a short list, but illustrative of the various features of the liberal mind. If these are the attributes, it's easy to see the possible solution: more government. A Christian mind must begin with at least two key principles. First, we're created in the image of God and thus have rationality and altruism. Second, we have all sinned and thus can manifest such characteristics as greed and selfishness. A Christian should believe in self-reliance and believe that we can make rational decisions which can help determine our future success. At the same time, a Christian mind realizes we live in a fallen world where poverty and crime exist. We recognize the responsibility of government to prevent fraud and oppression, but we also recognize our personal and corporate responsibility. Individual Christians, as well as the church, should help those in need. That would also include admonishing those with addictions or bad habits. They may bear some responsibility for their situation. A Christian mind should also recognize that even though people working in government also have a sin nature, that is why we need checks and balances in government. To put it simply, often more government is not the answer to problems in society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters now, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dr. Ed Gogek, who is a doctor and a psychiatrist and an individual that has actually treated over 10,000 different addicts and alcoholics in various points of treatment, and the book is entitled Marijuana Debunked. It is a handbook for parents, pundits, and politicians. We have a link on our website to marijuanadebunked.com. You can go there directly or else through our website, and you can get the book in paperback or hardback or Kindle. Let me also mention, for those of you that receive our Outlook magazine, back in March of 2014, just a little over a year ago, we did an entire issue on marijuana, pulling in the medical issues on one hand, some of the policy issues on the other. So that is available, and if you don't receive our Outlook magazine, you could write to us or send us an email. We'll send you a copy, and you can get that certainly from us. And of course, you may want to have a copy of this book as well. We already have phone calls coming in, so I might as well open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Let me spend a few more minutes with Dr. Gogek, then we'll take some of your phone calls. But one of your chapters not only talks about the teenage brain, and that's of concern, but the other is marijuana and driving. We hear from a lot of individuals, not only is it harmless, but that, we certainly would all agree that driving while intoxicated by alcohol is dangerous. But somehow we sort of have this mindset that driving while on marijuana is safe. What about that idea?
Yeah, I do want to eventually get to why the fight against legalization is winnable. But the thing about driving, it really shows what I call marijuana denial. And marijuana smokers, more than anybody, seem to insist that the drug is harmless. And I think that's, every drug has its own type of denial. And I think that's marijuana denial. And it shows up. They actually did a survey of teenagers, and 75% of the teenagers who use marijuana believe that it either made them better drivers or didn't harm their driving at all. And they don't have the same attitude about alcohol. And, they believe that even, despite being told the research. The research is that people who smoke pot and drive have twice the risk of a serious or fatal injury. And that's a combined study of several different studies put together. Some of the studies showed it was 7 times the likelihood of a serious accident. Some showed 0. So when they averaged it out, it came to about 2. But it's, we've had, in the year 2000, I think about 4% of U.S. traffic fatalities involve marijuana. Most recently, that's been up to about 12%, and it's increasing. And the fatalities involving marijuana are increasing while alcohol is going down. We've done a really good job of convincing people that drunk driving is not a good idea. And there's no push to do that about stone driving. But I can't say it's equally dangerous, but it's certainly very dangerous.
Well, let's see if we can, for just a minute, answer that question that you've raised. We have listeners in places like California and Oregon and Washington and Colorado, and we have other places where either medical marijuana, recreational marijuana is legal in one way or another. And so the argument that we hear so often is it's just a fait accompli. It's only a matter of time before those few states in the South and the Midwest don't go along with that. And yet you seem to believe, and I think your book does give some justification for the fact that we can maybe turn some of this around. Why so? Yes.
They only win when they vastly outspend us. In the state of Washington, they had $5 million. The opposition had 16,000. That's 300 to 1. In Massachusetts, it was 50 to 1, and all the money was just donated by one pro-marijuana billionaire.
Right.
When the spending comes close, we win. And the reason this is a very different one is that people are not hearing both sides. So I'm a Democrat, so I go around and I speak to Democratic groups. And people come up to me afterwards and they say, I had no idea. I haven't heard any of this stuff.
Yes.
And that's because they're not getting the information. Well, that's good news, because what it means is if we get them the information, their minds will change. And there's a couple things that we need to do. I mean, one is we need more outreach to get the information out to people. But I look at this, the groups that I work with that are anti-legalization, what I like about them is that they're bipartisan. I'm working with people with whom I disagree on every other issue. We kind of joke about it.
Yes.
And
believe me, I've been in some of those rooms too. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually, I actually like it. It's kind of fun in a way. I go out of my way, and I know how hard this is to do, but one of the things I tell people is when somebody from the other side does something right, you have to say it. So when I speak to Democratic groups and I'm talking about drug courts, I remind people, drug courts were invented by Janet Reno and Joe Biden wrote them into law. But today, the person that got the most recent award from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, Governor of the Year, is Rick Perry. Rick Perry has done more to promote drug courts than any of the Democrats who invented it. And, people don't really want to hear it, but I think it's important to say it. And it goes the other way around. There's plenty of anti-legalization Democrats. And it's, we just, in a way, we kind of need a no man's land or a truce on this one issue where we can work together on this one.
Sure.
The other thing that I think we need to do is the news media, we should be insisting that every news media outlet have a policy that journalists who use marijuana can't write on it or supervise people who write on it. Because I think a lot of the pro-marijuana slant from the news media is coming from people who use the drug. And you can't use a drug and be objective about it. So it's a huge conflict of interest. And they haven't taken this seriously. In fact, the New York Times came out with these huge pro-marijuana editorials that were, and in my book I pick them apart because they're factually untrue, which is kind of shocking for a major paper. But Andrew Rosenthal, who's the head of the editorial board, said, no, I don't ask people if they use marijuana. Well, he should.
Yeah.
He absolutely should. It's a conflict of interest.
Well, again, we require that political reporters, if they have donated to Hillary Clinton's campaign, not that anybody in the mainstream media would ever do that, or have given to the Clinton Foundation, shouldn't cover but again, we don't have the same kind of mindset here in terms of marijuana. Let me take a phone call, but then I want to come back to this idea of the drug courts, because that came out last night in the debate. And as you point out in Chapter 14, it was a Democratic answer, but it's being promoted by Rand Paul. And of course, you just mentioned Rick Perry. So let's first of all take a phone call just to...
Rand Paul, I don't think Rand Paul... Is Rand Paul pro-drug court?
He seemed to talk about the drug courts last night in a positive way, but I don't want to make speak for him. Make sense? Let me take a phone call real quickly because I think some of you would like to join the conversation today. And we'll head to Louisiana first, KPAE. Ricky, you're on. What would you like to say?
Thank you, Kerby. I just want to make 3 points. Of course, I used marijuana when I was a teenager almost 50 years ago, but it's very dangerous to drive because it slows your reflexes down very, very slow, so you can't react to traffic accidents. So it's extremely dangerous being doped up on pot. And I know from experience, because I did it when I was 16, it's very because it slows your reflexes down, and you can't react to traffic, as quick. The second thing is that there was no marijuana on the face of the earth until the curse, because marijuana is called a weed because it is a weed. God cursed the earth and brought forth thorns and thistles, and marijuana is actually a weed. So it's actually part of the curse of God. So if anybody's smoking it, especially if they claim to be Christians, you take them part of the curse.
And your third?
The third thing is that all the surveys they did or experiments they did with marijuana, the one thing that they keep finding about marijuana, they say, it does this to you, it does this. Every time they did a survey, and I'm going back 45 years ago when they first started coming out with the medical experiments and all that, the one thing that's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt is that it destroys the male hormones. So if you want to be a homosexual, that's a fast way to get there. You smoke a lot of pot.
Well, what would you comment? What about that first one there, the reaction time? Is that true?
Right. That's absolutely true. The marijuana users are always saying, oh, but marijuana users drive slower and they're more careful. And that's true that they do drive slower, and it's because they kind of have to. What they found with marijuana is as long as nothing unusual is happening, they can drive okay. But if there's any sudden change, somebody pulls out in front of you or something like that, they don't react well at all. And, of course, that's when accidents happen, is when something changes. So they do things. The New York Times did this thing that I consider quite dishonest, because Normal does it too. They wrote that there's a certain type of test where you're actually driving and they're observing you while driving, and on those tests, marijuana users do fine. You go, that's right, because when they're doing those tests, they don't put you in a really dangerous situation.
True.
Those tests are not very good. The test that really matters is what actually happens on the highway. And on those, marijuana users have twice the rate of a serious accident.
Wow. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have much more to talk about. This book is just chock full of great material. We'll talk a little more about some of the policy issues, but also the drug courts and some of the other issues in terms of recovery. And if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Book is just out, Marijuana Debunked, a handbook for parents, pundits, and politicians who want to know the case against legalization. We have information about it on our website. You can go there directly. And I think you're going to find this very helpful in some of your dialogue and discussion and debates, especially at the statewide level where a lot of this is taking place. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these messages.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now play. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
As you fight in your war room, please include Kerby and Point of View in your prayers. We have a very important opportunity right now. A wonderful friend has said that he will match every gift in September up to a total of $50,000. Point of View needs that support to keep equipping you for your life inside and outside your war room, both as you pray and as you live. So please call now and give generously. 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. That's 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
The book is entitled Marijuana Debunked. It's a handbook for parents and pundits and politicians who want to know about and really make the case against the legalization of marijuana. And we are privileged to have with us today Dr. Ed Gogek. He is an addiction psychiatrist who has spent 30 years in practice and has treated over 10,000 addicts and alcoholics. Brings not only the scientific and medical part to this, but also some of the public policy issues. So let's take another phone call or two before we get back into some of the issues in the book. And we'll head out to California this time. KYCC. Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm just a layman, but my personal experience is that I have a stepson who has been basically diagnosed with co-occurring disorder. So he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he self-medicates. And while most of the discussion with medical marijuana appears to be about pain management, pain abatement, no one seems to really address the issue from the mental disorder side. And everything that I've read indicates that if you're genetically predisposed to mental illness, bipolar, or schizophrenia, the effects of marijuana are much greater and occur much earlier in life.
Dr. Gogek, you're a psychiatrist. I'd love to hear your answer to that question.
Right. I mean, I've dealt with schizophrenia and marijuana a lot. And, you know, one of the things I say to people when they compare marijuana and alcohol, which is safe for the teens, I say to them, if schizophrenia ran in your family, which one would you rather have your kid doing? There's actually not clear evidence that marijuana causes schizophrenia, but we know that it makes it a lot worse.
Interesting. So,
and
the
it doesn't just make it worse. The United States actually spends $1 billion every year hospitalizing people with schizophrenia because of marijuana use. I mean, it's a huge expense. It also has shown that it speeds up the development of schizophrenia.
Wow. Okay, so self-medicating with marijuana is not the best treatment, right?
It is the worst thing, and unfortunately, people with schizophrenia are very attracted to marijuana, and it really is the worst drug for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's stay in California. I'll take another phone call from there. Chris, listening in also on KYCC, what would you like to say?
Oh, I just want to say, I agree with what you're saying about marijuana, but I think the biggest problem with drugs in this country is the stuff that is made by the drug companies here. It's more addictive. They're opiates. They're more highly addictive. I've seen it firsthand with friends and family members that have been on Norcos or whatever for pain. But, the drug companies would actually not be in business if it weren't them making addicts out of people, because more people take them because they're addicted versus because they need them. And I think that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem with kids nowadays. There was a recent story in the news here close to where I live where, football players are taking Adderall before football games, and now one guy's in a coma. And, how that's legal because, it's prescribed by a doctor. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I actually have a partly alternative medicine practice, so I'm not a big fan of the drug companies. And in this case, this was something the drug companies really went out of their way to promote the idea. There's a time about 10, 15 years ago where they were telling all of us, we're not treating pain enough. We're too worried about getting people hooked on drugs. And they really pushed the doctors to use the opiates. And they got a lot of other doctors to come out and give talks on this. And it was not a good thing. I treat a lot of heroin addicts right now, and pretty much they all tell me the same story. They started out with pills and then found out that heroin was cheaper. So I'm not a fan of the drug companies, and we do way overuse the opiates in this country, and it is a big problem. However, far more kids are abusing marijuana than opiates. And marijuana causes its own set of damage. I don't ever want to say one drug is better or worse than another, but marijuana causes a huge amount of problems. And the problem is almost everybody starts in their teen years. I mean, this is true of almost all drugs, but especially marijuana, because that message has gone out that it's supposedly a safer drug for kids, and it's not. Half of all pot smokers start before age 18 and a quarter before 16. And what we found is every single time we loosen marijuana laws, when we decriminalize it, when we pass medical marijuana laws, teenage use goes up.
Sure. Yeah, we're always told it's going to go down. It's like, okay, let's use a little bit of common sense here. First of all, we already have a number of intoxicants, okay? We already start with the assumption that alcohol is legal. We can have that debate forever, but it is. But do we want to have more intoxicants? And do we really honestly, in our heart of heart, believe that if we legalize it or decriminalize it, there's going to be less use or more responsible use? And I think we know the answer to that one. What about this issue of addiction? We just talked about opiates a minute ago. Some people say, oh, marijuana is not addictive, but I think your argument has been that some people that are addicted to marijuana, because they hear those phrases, are embarrassed to acknowledge that they are addicted to it. What's the real story?
Right. It's very hard for a marijuana user to go for treatment because they feel stupid for being addicted because they've been told it's not addictive.
Yes.
It is addictive. It's a bit less addictive than alcohol. But the people who are addicted, there's about 3 or 4 million people, I think, who are addicted to marijuana in the United States. And for them, it's a real problem. I mean, I treat these people, and the biggest problem is they spend all their money on pot.
Yes.
But also they say, they can't go anywhere without smoking. Their family complains about it. They lose interest in it's a typical addiction story. They lose interest in everything else they used to do. And the biggest problem with it, in a way, is that it doesn't do all the really horrible things. 90% of people who have a substance abuse problem don't get any help and don't want it. Their attitude is, leave me alone, I don't have a problem. But they get in trouble. They get arrested. They get in an accident. The doctor tells them that they're hurting their liver. Their wife leaves them. Something really extreme happens, and they have to get clean and sober. With marijuana, they have a tendency just to do nothing and to kind of waste their lives. And so they don't hit a really clear bottom, and it's one of the reasons they can just go on and on for a long time.
You talked about policy, and some of the other calls are going to be on policy, but is there a marijuana lobby, and where does that money come from, and why have they been successful in some of those states? You've talked about the amount of money coming in. Does that come from George Soros and Peter Lewis and a few people like that? John Sterling?
Exactly.
Sperling? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, those are the big three. And Lewis and Sperling, and they've both died recently, but they were both regular marijuana users. Richard Branson, who's now big in this, is a marijuana user.
Yes.
Soros acknowledged using marijuana. I don't know how recently or how often he used it. But yeah, it's coming from a handful of people who I think are just plain wrong. And I think I know what it was like. When I used marijuana, marijuana does something to people to make them proselytizers. There's this book, A Child's Garden of Grass. It sounds funny, but it's actually true.
It's true.
And in that book, it came out in 1971, and it said, grass smokers are the world's greatest proselytizers. And it really is true. And if you look at it, it's kind of amazing. There's this huge movement to legalize marijuana. There's no movement like this for any other drug. Cocaine was really popular in the 80s. There was no movement to legalize it. Ecstasy is used by huge numbers of people who get together in groups just to use the drug. There's no movement to legalize it. Teenagers, 18 through 20, often resent the fact that they can't drink because the age was raised to 21. There's no movement to lower the drinking age. But there's this huge legalized marijuana movement. And what happened to me when I used it is, within a few months of starting, I was taking a debate class, and all I wanted to debate was the legalization of marijuana. And if you look at the very first pro-legalization group, it came out in 1970. That was when people just started using marijuana. And I've seen this in patients over and over again. And I hear the story. They start using marijuana, and very quickly they're saying, it's unfair, it's not as bad as alcohol, it should be legal. It seems to come with using the drug. And the other thing is, it goes away when they stop. I mean, for me, when I quit smoking pot, I looked back on all these things I'd said and done, and I go, wow, that was really crazy. I treated it like manna from heaven, and it's just a drug of abuse. But that really is the mind of a marijuana user, and I think that's the reason for this whole movement. And it sounds kind of weird to say this, but I think it's one of the most harmful things about it is that it's self-perpetuating them.
Yes, it certainly is. I used to make a joke, and I don't much anymore, but I used to say that one of the most compelling arguments for legalizing marijuana is so you didn't have to hear the arguments any longer from some of the people that advocated it. Let's take a break. We've got a lot of people on
they won't stop.
Yeah, they just won't stop. Okay, well, when we come back from the break, we've got a number of people that want to get into some of the policy issues, and you have done an outstanding job in 4 different chapters in the book dealing with that. So when we come back from the break, I'll give you a chance, 1, 2, 3, 4, if we can get all 4 of you in, or at least a couple of you in, to ask some questions or make some comments. And if you are just joining us, we've been talking today, and we'll continue to talk with Dr. Ed Gogek. His book is entitled Marijuana Debunked. We have information about it on our website, and you can get it in paperback or hardback or Kindle. It's just out, and you're going to find a lot of great material on these 300 pages. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Ed Gogek with us for a few more minutes, addiction specialist that has actually worked in this area for more than 30 years, a psychiatrist. And let's take a few more phone calls. The book is entitled Marijuana Debunked. We'll head out to Georgia this time. Jimmy, thank you for calling today.
Hey, I've been taking...
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to touch that the guy said. I don't know. I forgot his name already.
Dr. Ed Gogek, yes.
Anyways, he said we have no significant evidence that marijuana makes schizophrenia worse. And then 20 seconds later, he says marijuana makes schizophrenia significantly worse. So stop making bogus claims about things that you have no evidence for and that nothing's been proven. Secondly, as a recovering drug addict, recovering alcoholic, born-again Christian, I also like to use marijuana. I was prescribed Adderall. I was prescribed Xanax. I was prescribed antidepressants. I was prescribed pain medication. I played minor league baseball, had shoulder problems, been addicted to it all. The fact that you said marijuana makes people not successful and seem to waste away their lives. I'm the youngest director of my company. I'm in phenomenal shape. Marijuana helps me with anxiety and stress. Sometimes I actually feel closer to God. So I want to get your thoughts on that, and I'll hang up.
Dr. Gogek?
Okay, well, two things. What I said about schizophrenia is the evidence is not clear that it causes schizophrenia, but it's definitely clear that it makes schizophrenia worse. So if people have not developed schizophrenia yet, we don't know that it's going to make it. As far as recovering addicts using marijuana, I think it's a really bad idea. It's just substituting another addictive drug. Like I said, marijuana users will always say that it helps them, well, not always, but very often say that it helps them. But when they quit, they find out that it hasn't. My suggestion, it takes about 2 or 3 months to get out of your body. My suggestion is sometime go 3 months without it and see how you're doing. You might find that you're doing a lot better. And also, if you're in recovery, I know that, AA has no opinion on outside issues, but everybody I know who's in recovery says, they jokingly call it marijuana maintenance, but they say marijuana maintenance is just drug abuse. They don't accept it at all as useful. So I would suggest that anybody who's in recovery should really get totally clean and sober because they'll usually like it a lot better.
Let's see if we can take another phone call or two. We'll go to California. Rick, you're on with Dr. Ed Gogek.
Hi, Ed. I wanted to say that I agree with 99% of what you're saying, and I'm not for the legalization of marijuana. I'm not for here in California, the medical marijuana laws that they have here. I see people come in, their kids, and make up some kind of excuse. Some doctor just writes it off and lets them get it. But having it as a stage 1 classified with heroin makes it where the law says that you cannot study it. Now, I believe that God made this world and everything in it, and I believe that it's the perversion of what men have done with the drug that have made it where it's at now. And I don't believe that it should be legalized. Because I do believe what you're saying, and I've smoked marijuana in my life, but I believe that there's good things that are in it that need to be studied. And I believe that if we do research and we have scientists that study this, I believe they'll find there is good things that are also in it.
Okay, let me jump in real quickly because he talked about this issue of medical marijuana. Do you see medical marijuana abuse? And living in California, I guess he's probably seen some of that. What else have you seen nationwide?
Oh, yeah, it's mostly abuse. There's a study out of California that found that medical marijuana patients the average patient was 32-year-old male who started smoking pot as a teenager. And I looked more closely at this, and 90% of the medical marijuana patients get their pot for pain, and pain patients should be at least 50% female, whereas marijuana abusers are about 70% male. And I contacted all the medical marijuana programs in the country. I put this in the book, Marijuana Debunked.
Right.
And their pain patients on marijuana are very close to 70% male. So most of it, the vast majority of it, almost all of it, is going to drug abuse. But yes, there are definitely some medical uses, and I think it should be studied. I don't want to see medical marijuana laws. I do want to see the prescription cannabinoids available and used, and doctors learn how to use them. They can still study it as a Schedule 1. My objection to rescheduling it is that the marijuana lobby is just pushing for everything, and I think we need to say no to them. I work with drug addicts for a living. You don't compromise with this disease. You have to say no. And I would say no until we repeal all these medical marijuana laws, which are mostly bogus and are harmful, repeal the legalization laws, get marijuana under control in this country. We have an epidemic of it. And then let's look at rescheduling but I don't think we need to. I think, you can study a Schedule 1 drug. I think this is a myth made up by the marijuana lobby that is so hard to study because there are people who can study it. And if it's difficult, that should be changed. But I don't think it has to be changed by rescheduling it.
We've got a couple other calls, but I thought maybe I'll just combine them. A couple of people online wanted to talk about the fact that they believe that marijuana helped with seizures. And that gets into, are there any medical benefits to marijuana?
Right. Well, there are, extracts of marijuana can help with all sorts of things. It's a good anti-nausea drug. It does help with certain types of pain. It's very good for the muscle spasms of multiple sclerosis. And the CBD, not the THC, but the CBD helps with certain rare seizures. It does help with that. But the thing is, all those are available as prescription drugs. What Sanjay Gupta did on his show Weed was, I think, incredibly dishonest, because he told people that there are these people having to move to Colorado to get CBD because the medical marijuana wasn't legal in their states. Well, a Pedialex is a drug that is pure CBD. It's higher quality, and it's not available by prescription, but it's available through an FDA program. Any doctor can contact them and get it. So you can get CBD in all 50 states. You don't have to move to Colorado. And the research on it hasn't been shown to work that well. The thing is, when it does work, it works great. It does help with certain rare seizures. But again, the pro-marijuana people are pushing it as if it's, like I said, manna from heaven, which is exactly what I thought of it when I was using it. And it's not. It's not this huge answer to all these problems. Almost anything that it's been suggested for, it's not even a first-line treatment. There are other medicines that work better.
Let me just mention this before we let you go, that we have a link to your website, marijuanadebunked.com. So if people wanted to get a copy of the book, or if they wanted to follow your blog or contact you, they can do that. And Dr. Gogek, I appreciate you giving us some time today. This is an issue we've addressed before, but this is perhaps one of the best books I've ever seen, over 300 pages that address not only the scientific and medical issues, but some of the public policy issues. So I appreciate you giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Okay, yeah, I'm as an addiction counselor, I'm kind of very confrontative, and the book is in that style. And I thank you for having me on.
Well, I think we could do it again when we come back to this issue. It was a topic yesterday, just in passing at the Republican debate. It will show up again. And for those of you in the various states where we've heard from today, you certainly know that you're in the midst of some of these debates and discussion. And I think you owe it to yourself to read some of the other things being written, and certainly his ability to debunk some of the things that have shown up in some of these editorials. So again, Marijuana Debunked, Ed Gogek with us, and we're going to take a break and come back and get into some of these economic issues. Some of those, of course, surfaced in the Republican debate, but also, of course, a lot of people said, where is the economy going? What about the stock market and some others? Jerry Tuma will be in studio with us, so you can watch or listen to him. He's the founder and president of Cornerstone Financial Services. Been looking at some trends that you need to pay attention to, not only in terms of your own finances, but where's the country going right now, and what are some of the issues that do need to be addressed, not only by these candidates, but even by us as individuals. So I think you're going to really appreciate that conversation. And again, we'll open up the phones for your questions about your finances and the economy and your money. That's all coming up. Take a time to visit the website and find some of these resources. They're all available at our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, don't forget, we do have a matching opportunity for you to double your donation to Point of View. We'll be right back.
As the great American philosopher Elvis Presley once said, when things go wrong, don't go with them. Now, I don't know what you think about Elvis. The point I want to drive home, yes, it's been a difficult year, but instead of giving up, we should double up. Double our efforts to communicate the truth about Jesus Christ. Double our time countering the false views around us. And double your partnership with Point of View, because helping you do those things is a big part of our mission. Now through September 30th, a gracious friend of the ministry is going to double your support on his own. So when I said I want you to double your partnership, do I want you to dig even deeper? Absolutely. But no matter what you give, up to $50,000, this friend will double that. So double up. This is a great time to make your first gift ever. Call 800-347-5151 or give online at pointofview.net. Please don't fret. Invest. Pray. Let's do this. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to talk about the economy and about your money, and certainly some of the questions that you probably have been smoldering for some time. I know that Jerry Tuma has been with us many times, and we traded some text a while back, especially after that Monday when the stock market went down, and it just seemed like a good time to bring him back. But we waited a little bit, and I'm glad we did, because now we have, of course, a couple of Republican debates behind us. We have a little bit more of a perspective on what's happening in the stock market. And so I think you're really going to appreciate that. Jerry Tuma has been with us many times before, certified financial planner, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. Many of you I know have his book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond, and we've made that available, as well as the tape series. And I'll issue the disclaimer, which we always do, and that is, of course, as the founder and president of Cornerstone, this is an individual that is going to try to give you some general trends, but material on the program is really intended for general information only, should not be taken as specific investment, tax, or legal advice. But we're going to certainly, Jerry, encourage people to connect up with you at cornerstonereport.com. And one of the things I find very helpful is something that you are making available, 2015, the year in pictures. Now, if you print it out on your computer, make sure there's a lot of paper, because there's a lot of paper and a lot of colors, but nobody does a better job, I think, than you of helping us see the graphs, the charts, and backing up everything you're going to say. And what we're seeing right now is a possibility that we're getting close to a top. And if that's the case, that has some implication possibly for where money might be put and how people begin to evaluate their finances.
Very true. Thank you, Kerby. Yeah, and again, we can't tell you specifically. People go, what should I do? I can't tell you what to do. I can give you my opinion about the market. I can tell you what I think the risks are. Right now, Kerby, we're in a position where I think the risks are what we call asymmetric risk, meaning the upside potential from here is, in my view, virtually nil. I'm talking about for the next year or two. I'm not talking about for 10 or 20 years. And the downside risks are huge right now. I do think that the U.S. economy is in much better shape than the last downturn we entered. The banking system is in much better shape. Last time in 2008, the United States was more or less the epicenter of everything. We were like this giant boulder that got thrown into a stock pond, and the ripples went all over the world. But it emanated from Wall Street, from the investment banks, from the shoddy underwriting on, subprime mortgages that they levered 30 to 1 and on and on. We won't go into that in great detail. We talk about a lot in our book, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. This time, though, it's not starting in the United States. And when I say this time, I mean, I believe we've entered a new bear market.
Yes.
Everything that I look at, and I've studied, again, most people have this assumption, and it starts this way. In our industry, they always say, well, nobody has a crystal ball, therefore, and then, okay, but wait a minute. Apostle Paul said something sort of about that. He said, we see through a glass darkly, King James Version. In other words, he didn't say the future's completely unknowable. Now, no one knows exactly how the zigs and zags are going to work. No one knows the future exactly, but you can pick up trends, you can study tendencies, and so forth. And so what I refer to, and I got a chart in front, I'm probably going to work on another another newsletter here pretty quickly, but
yeah, that chart was really compelling.
It's not predicting, it's recognition. So in other words, I was trained differently than most others. Dr. James McKeever was my mentor. He shared the speaking platform with Reagan and Greenspan. And essentially, I was never taught to hold on forever, that there's kind of like in Ecclesiastes, it talks about there's a time to plant, time to harvest, time to laugh, time to cry. Life is cyclical. In my view, there's a time to buy, and a time to sell. I think it's the same principle. In James, it talks about don't presume the future. Don't say we're going to go to such and such city and buy or sell. You don't know for sure what's going to happen. So what we've done, and we've kind of gotten pretty good at this over the years by God's grace, and I give him the credit for it because I can't let it go to my head or I'm in trouble. You know how that works. Mm-hmm. But it's a matter of we've learned to, by studying the tops of bear markets historically over the last 100 years, especially over the last 25, you learn to recognize them. In other words, if you went to the doctor,
patterns,
if you had 104 fever tomorrow, you'd probably wheel yourself into the emergency room if you could get there before you passed out at 104. And then they would measure your symptoms. They say, okay, they'd take your blood pressure, they do a blood test, they do all these things. Okay, your symptoms are X, therefore that leads us to conclude probably you have this disease. Then they're going to give you the medicine. That's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, the symptoms of a bull market top are all in. We said that in July on our radio show. One of my clients came in. He said, man, your show was really good last week. I said, good. What did I talk about? I don't remember. He said, well, you basically said that every single thing that you need prior to a bear market has now happened. And this was in July, which is exactly when the debt in the market, the stock market margin debt, topped. So what we see now is, again, past performance is no guarantee, and you can't marry any of these scenarios because that's when you really mess up, is if you marry some idea that you have. Because, again, it's a matter of monitoring and it's a recognition. So we may say, okay, here's your disease, here's the medicine, but now we got to monitor to see how you do on it. That's really what we're doing here is we're looking at what are the symptoms of the top, which we talked about in 2015 Year in Pictures, one part called The Canary in the Coal Mine.
Right.
And we said, here's what we see happening in that newsletter, which is written in April. And now here we are in September, mid-September. And so far, by God's grace, again, I'm not always perfect. I missed some calls too.
But you've been like 3 out of 4 in the
out of the last 4 bear market tops.
And past performance is not always perfect, but it helps you sleep better at night,
right? It does, yeah. So 3 out of the last 4 we've called.
You have got a better batting average than anybody I've known. And again, you've looked at the canaries in the coal mine. Now, for anybody who doesn't understand that metaphor, in the old days when you had miners, one of the ways in which they could make sure that there wasn't gas that would kill people is they would bring a canary. And if the canary fell over, you knew it was time to get out of the mine.
Exactly.
Well, I'm looking at these, and it's interesting how this fits with some other things we've talked about. Every 7 years, 2001, 2008, here we are again, 2015.
Yep.
And I'm not saying anything about the 7 years, although there's some books that have been out about the Shemitah and everything. But you're looking at it sheerly from an economic point of view, but with a Christian set of eyes, saying, when I look at all the other times in which the market has gone down, this one looks exactly like 2001 and 2008, essentially. Am I saying
very close to it? Yes. Yeah. So you look at the macroeconomic leading indicators like the canaries, which would be things like copper prices and leading indicators of the economy. Most of the media focuses on, and unfortunately, most of the economics profession focuses on the lagging indicators. What's unemployment doing? Jobs. Those are the tail end of the train. Those aren't the leading. We want to look at the engine on the train and where it's going. So those leading indicators in April were all telling us bad things are coming. But if they're leading, that means by definition it hasn't happened yet.
That's a good point.
It took until July before this thing finally topped out. Margin debt, which is when people borrow money to invest in the stock market, hit a higher point in July than it did under the dot-com era in 2000, which is mind-boggling to me. I guess we're never going to learn. It's just human nature. But all the things that are what we would call the precursors to bears, and I'm talking about major ones, not minor ones, all the precursors to bears are in. They were in by July, and sure enough, by August, we started what I think is the next down leg, the first down leg, which is generally the easiest one. And there's usually 3 phases. Past performance is no guarantee, but the second and third phase are usually the bad ones. So this one is what we call the denial phase, where people say it's not really a bear, it's just a correction, and then the bad stuff hits in the next 12 to 18 months. So that's the way the world looks to me. Like I said, I think the U.S. economy is in a lot better shape than 08. This is not like 08 economically, but I think in terms of the stock market, it probably is because it's very overvalued and very highly leveraged.
We're going to take a break. And by the way, if you'd like to ask questions along the way, that number, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to come back to this idea of what happened in the dot-com era, but we'll take a break and talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, as we move further into this political campaign season, we'll see the liberal mind at work. Dr. Lau Rossiter, a forensic psychiatrist, has written about the liberal mindset, and we see lots of evidence of its impact on politicians and voters. Here are a few of the attributes of the liberal mind that he has discovered. It does not preach an ethic of self-reliance or self-determination. It does not advocate moral rectitude or understand the critical role of morality in human relating. It does not celebrate genuine altruism of private charity. It is focused on the poor and victimized while ignoring the possibility that they may bear responsibility for their plight. This is just a short list, but illustrative of the various features of the liberal mind. If these are the attributes, it's easy to see the possible solution: more government. A Christian mind must begin with at least two key principles. First, we're created in the image of God and thus have rationality and altruism. Second, we have all sinned and thus can manifest such characteristics as greed and selfishness. A Christian should believe in self-reliance and believe that we can make rational decisions which can help determine our future success. At the same time, a Christian mind realizes we live in a fallen world where poverty and crime exist. We recognize the responsibility of government to prevent fraud and oppression, but we also recognize our personal and corporate responsibility. Individual Christians, as well as the church, should help those in need. That would also include admonishing those with addictions or bad habits. They may bear some responsibility for their situation. A Christian mind should also recognize that even though people working in government also have a sin nature, that is why we need checks and balances in government. To put it simply, often more government is not the answer to problems in society. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Giving Films, 90 Minutes in Heaven, based on a true story, in theaters now, rated PG-13. More information at 90minutesinheaventhemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
What is the future of the economy? Well, nobody can predict it accurately, but we can look at some trends, and those trends are something that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we're looking at this in a general way, and if you would like to contact Jerry Tuma and find out more specifically, one of the things we so encourage you to do is to go to cornerstonereport.com. We have a link to it on the website, and of course, you have the one 2015, the year in pictures. And like I said, if you're going to print it out, make sure you have enough paper and
right.
ink in your printer, because there's a lot of great material. And if you'd like to join our conversation today, maybe you have questions about various investments or what you should do. And after all, we've looked at a collapse in the economy in 2001, in 2008, and now we're at 2015. About every 7 years, I see something kind of intriguing happening there. But let me go back to one that happened before, and that was the dot-com explosion. There was a time when people were investing in these dot-coms and pets.com and all sorts of things. I remember them all. But you have shown here that what's called the U.S. margin debt is actually higher than it was back in the 1990s. Now, some people have responded to that, Jerry, saying, oh, that's no big deal because it's just as high as it was in 2000. And you're going, that was the highest in history compared to GDP. Am I correct?
Exactly, yes. And so you got two factors at work there, Kerby. This is one reason I don't think like I said, I don't think the U.S. economy is going to get hit really badly like 2008, but the market probably will be for two reasons. Number one, it's extremely overvalued, which means people have been searching for yield. Their CDs make nothing. They've been forced to more aggressive stuff, and they've gone into the stock market in spades now. And the way that you measure that is a couple of things. We have valuations, which I won't, that takes a little longer to explain, but it's in the special report. Here are the valuations compared to history. And I heard a commentator once say, well, the U.S. stock market's not too expensive right now. If you compare it to 2000, it's cheaper. And I went ballistic on the radio show. Of course, we do a weekend radio show. I said, okay, you're dealing with, what is it, Mount Denali now? It used to be Mount Everest. Okay, so 2000 was Mount Everest levels of overvaluation, the highest in the history of the world, or at least the modern world. And you're comparing it to that? No, so we're at Mount McKinley now, or is that Denali? Anyway, bottom line is we're at the second most overvalued
that does not
market
look good.
Ever, and there's more debt, because the issue is when people get more and more confident, they get sucked into the market, greed sets in, complacency. It's all based on human nature and the cycles. When you borrow money to go into the stock market, once it starts rolling over and coming down, which it's just started to do, that's built-in selling pressure. We know from behavioral economics that people hate losses emotionally twice as bad as they enjoy gains, 2.5 times precisely. So what that means is it's more pain, more panic, and more fear. Now, we're not in the fear phase yet. I say yet, meaning yet. It's not happening yet, but it's coming, I believe. And one of the ways you almost know, nothing's guaranteed, but when the percentage of borrowed money to go into the stock market today actually, or in July of this year, actually exceeded what it was under the biggest mania in history in the 2000s, in the dot-com era, that's extraordinary. And what that means is everybody's thrown caution to the wind. They've invested too much. But the bigger factor is how much money do they borrow. So if you put $100,000 in the market and only $50,000 is yours, and you borrowed $50 from your broker, you're going to lose money twice as fast. So on the way up, they make it twice as fast. On the way down, they lose it twice as fast, which is one reason the panic sets in. But margin call selling tends to self-perpetuate. It becomes like a rolling ball, snowball that goes downhill, and it picks up steam as you go. That's why the old saying is that the market rides an escalator up. It comes down a lot faster. It's clearly lost its momentum. Now saying there's more bear market to come. Your best guess. And again, this is where we have to monitor, like, okay, how to watch for the next bottom. And my opinion is we are nowhere near the next bottom. I think there's a major bear coming. I reserve the right to change my opinion later because you have to monitor it. But usually these things take about 18 months-ish to work out altogether, to flush the excess debt out of the system. Now, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean we won't have another bull market. We will. It'll be another upcycle. So again, if you're 25 years old and you're putting money in your 401k every month and you got 30 or 40 years, this is not going to affect you that badly probably. If you're 55, 60 years old and you got a big lump sum and not long to retire, it might make a huge difference, because we know the investment math simply says if you have another 50% decline, which you very well could have, matter of fact, I think that's more likely than not. I think the odds are high we're going to have another big decline in the market. Then it takes 100% gain to make your money back, which essentially means after you go through all the pain and suffering of the crash, assuming it works out this way, and it takes you 5 more years to get back to where you started again. So while I'm going to reemphasize that nobody knows the future for sure, and I reserve the right to change my opinion later. We're going to monitor this. I'm just saying these are the historic trends that we can see. In my opinion, we've clearly topped out. We now have to monitor for phases 2 and 3. Right now, we're in the denial phase, it would appear psychologically. Phase 2 is generally the recognition phase, where people go, oh, this really is a bear market, but now they're afraid to do anything about it, because what if I lock in at the bottom? And then finally, you usually get, and again, past performance, no guarantee on history, but generally you have a third phase called a capitulation or panic phase, where they just, by then the self-survival mechanism kicks in and they're like, I can't lose all my money, and they panic. And more people unload at the bottom than any other time.
Isn't that amazing?
They buy more at the top and they unload at the bottom, which has to be true because it's all based on supply and demand.
It certainly is. Let's take some phone calls, but let me again mention that this program is intended for general information, but if you want to contact certainly Jerry Tuma off air, that is something you can do. And I do want to come back in just a minute and talk about China and the emerging markets and all the rest, but let's take some phone calls. We'll go first to Mary on the Good News Network in Georgia. Mary, what would you like to ask?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Just real quickly, I'm an employee and I have a 401k with my employer with a match, and I'm not ready to retire at this point. What can I do to hopefully decrease my losses when the market does decline.
Okay, let me give you some ideas. And again, I can't give specific recommendations. I can give you some educated hints. How's that? All right, so generally, most people, it depends on how you want to do this. Some people, when they're younger, they will keep putting money in, which is called dollar cost averaging. So when the market goes down, you're buying more shares when the price is low than you would be when it's high. If you're more worried about capital preservation in case this gets a lot worse, most 401ks will have a cash account, like a money market. They'll have a fixed account, an intermediate term bond fund that's government based or high quality bonds. Those are going to be generally your more secure places in the short run if this bear market goes the way I think it's going to go. In other words, if we do have another 50% or we do have an 18-month, and I don't think, frankly, Kerby, and this is just a gut feeling, and I could be wrong on this, obviously, I don't think it doesn't feel to me like we're going to have more of a 2008 market, but maybe more like the 2000, 2003, more of a parachute drop, a little more lengthy, kind of like a ball. In other words, not Niagara Falls in a barrel,
like
but a ball down the
stairs. Yeah.
Down the stairs.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
That's what I think we're coming to. Yeah. So you've got to make your decision, Mary, on do I want to focus on capital preservation, which means I have the ability to not lose money in the short run and buy back in when it looks like we're hitting a bottom. And Kerby will have to invite me back when we think it's time for the bottom, so I can tell everybody, assuming I'm right. Or so if you're interested in capital preservation, you might want to go to one of those more secure places in there. You don't lose the match that way. You just do a shift internally. So you have to look at what are the options inside the 401k. There's virtually always something that's fairly secure, low risk. And then you have to also, again, watch for when do you want to go back in later on. Now, that's one approach. It's not the only approach. That's the approach our firm tends to take, but other people have other approaches.
And that's what you do for your clients, to help them to figure out when they want to come in and out.
Is it okay if I give the 800 number?
Yes, please do.
Our phone number, if you would like some more specifics, you could talk to one of our advisors, is 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285. And so some people may want to become clients. I know we get clients from Point of View from different parts of the country. And, the advisors can kind of tell you, here's what we do. If you're still in the 401k, you've kind of got to follow, kind of some of the parameters I gave you earlier, because you don't want to lose the match, and plus you're still employed. But people that have access to their money in an IRA or retired, that's a different story.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary.
Sure. Mary, I might also encourage you to listen to Jerry on his weekend program as well, and that's something that you can find out more about by getting to some of the material that we've made available here, www.cornerstonereport.com.
Right.
And there is that year in pictures, and I've got my copy, and you brought me another one here. So, again, we have the same kind of material.
You can go read it. You can grade us. Now, it is a 40-page special report, so I'll warn you, I've never written a 40-pager before for Kerby. It was exhausting. Six weeks, believe it or not, to put this one together. But I felt like we were at a point in history where I really kind of needed to document, here's what we believe from A to Z, comprehensive across the board, the market, the economy, copper, Greece, Russia, geopolitics, oil, you name it. So it's all in that special report.
We got a lot more to talk about right after these important messages.
Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now play. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
As you fight in your war room, please include Kerby and Point of View in your prayers. We have a very important opportunity right now. A wonderful friend has said that he will match every gift in September up to a total of $50,000. Point of View needs that support to keep equipping you for your life inside and outside your war room, both as you pray and as you live. So please call now and give generously. 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. That's 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation today, maybe you have a question about your own finances or the economy, we are privileged to have in studio with us today Jerry Tuma, a certified financial planner, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services, and his book, which I have prominently featured right here, From Boom to Bust and Beyond. And I thought for just a minute we would take some ideas out of that book and even apply it to the last two Republican presidential debates.
All right.
Two issues. First of all, issue number one, and that's baby boomers. Anybody that has ever read any of your material recognizes that you say it's significant when you have 76 million born, now it's 78 million because of immigration, and this mass of people moving through life. We saw that diaper industry revenues doubled in the 1950s, right. And then you saw there was a crush to go to college, there was a crush to buy houses, and on and on and on. And you've been following this. Well, now we're facing an issue that did come up in the last two debates, and that's entitlements. Mm-hmm. Because now more and more every year, almost 4 million, it's about 3 million right now, but it's getting close to 4 million every single year past the age of 65 and are eligible for Social Security. Well, you don't have to know much about higher mathematics to figure out we've got this bulge going into entitlement, and if we don't do some entitlement reform, we're in real trouble. So what do we think about this?
You referred to, I think, I don't know if you used this term, but I think I heard it from you, but I heard it from another guy, the pig and the python.
Yes, sure.
The baby boomers were like this giant pig moving down the python. And it's funny, I remember there's a Christian singing group called the Imperials back in the 70s, mm-hmm. and they had a song about there's a shortage. There's a shortage on fuel and shortage on this, but no shortage on God's love. All those shortages were happening because the baby boomers were starting to affect the economy, and they hadn't pre-planned for them. They underestimated the demand that the baby boomers were going to place on the economy and the marketplace. When 76 million people buy anything, it's going to push the price higher and the resources higher. So we've seen them move all the way through the system. We've seen them, they had the top of the housing market hit exactly when it should have hit in 2005 and 6, which we did. We said that in 1997, that the housing market should top around 2005 or 2006. And that's simple supply and demand. It's math. We knew the baby boomers peaked in 1961 in terms of their growth rate. We knew that the average person peaks in terms of spending for housing at age 44. Add those two together, you get 2005, and that was the mega top of the housing market. Now, we know housing's recovering, but in many areas of the country, it's still never recovered from that, at least not yet. So the issue is the baby boomers will affect every single aspect of life in human history for the United States, all the way through. Now they're entering, as you mentioned, I think the stat that I hear commonly referred to is 10,000 a day moving into Social Security and Medicare. But again, that's the pig and the python. We're in the very early stages of the python showing up in this part of society. So we're just now entering what we would call the ramp-up phase. If you can imagine, if you've ever been to Denver, it's flat plains and then you go straight up the mountains. We're kind of just starting at the foothill now. We're just barely entering the ramp-up of the spending for the baby boomers and Medicare and Social Security, because most of the baby boomers are still too young. You know, I won't ask your age, but I just turned 60, so I'm not there yet.
I'm older than you are. So,
okay, but a lot of the baby boomers are slightly younger than me. But that is going to have an enormous impact, just like it did on housing and every other aspect of American society. The stock market was driven by the baby boomers from 1982 to 2005 or 6. The entitlements program is broken.
Yes.
Period. It's broken.
The other issue that has surfaced, and this is where you separate a lot of people, because there's some Republicans that are concerned about $18 trillion in debt.
Right.
There are other Republicans and most of the Democratic candidates who say, no big deal. And I wrote a commentary just recently based upon what appeared, interestingly enough, in the New York Times by Paul Krugman. And his argument was, well, debt's not that big a deal because, after all, we can borrow at very low interest rates, and this would be helpful so that we can rebuild our infrastructure. But that gets back to the second point I made just a minute ago, and that is, if you're borrowing to actually build your infrastructure, that might be good. It's like if you borrow money to fix up your house and later you sell your house, that's a really good investment. But if you're borrowing money on your credit card to go to fancy restaurants and eat out, that and entitlement is not building the infrastructure.
No, it's not.
These people that try to argue that we shouldn't be concerned about our national debt, I don't know what they're smoking, if we can talk about our conversation we had the last hour, but that should be of concern, shouldn't it?
It's a huge concern because even though the national debt as a percentage of the GDP right now, which is what the liberals love to quote, is not out of control. But again, the baby boomers are just now starting in the system. So by the time you get to that 2025 or 2030, it's going to be an enormous issue. And I don't know why, but politicians, maybe it's our political system because people get reelected short term and they're not around to see the long term results for the short term pain that they need to fix it. But it's almost certain to be a crisis simply because no one's talking about it, no one's fixing it, no one's proving alternatives. I mean, President Bush tried to come out after he was reelected and talk about it. Yeah. And as soon as he said we need to try to privatize it, I'm like, oh no, he's toast. They won't, he's out. He lost every dime of political capital. Now, he was right about what he said, but politically it was impossible, and I still think it most likely is. But the issue is, I do believe it will create a crisis. I do believe it will probably create a crisis in the U.S. dollar sometime in the next decade, not this decade, not now, but probably somewhere out in the future. I think it will likely be inflated away. That's historically, when push comes to shove, that's how the politicians tend to handle it. They don't want to tax too much because that's plucking the goose that laid the golden egg. And if you pluck it too much, it dies or goes away. Says, we don't like it here, we're leaving. And corporations are moving out of America because they're getting plucked too much. So you can't overtax too much. And then once you've given somebody free money and free benefits and free this and all that, they don't like giving it back. And so now the politicians are stuck. So what do? They usually go, well, let's deficit infrastructure spend. Best case I could make for infrastructure right now would be some Republican candidate would have to do this because it wouldn't be the left. We need to build a natural gas pipeline distribution center throughout the whole United States, a complete structure, just like we have interstate highways for our trucks. That's infrastructure spending that has increased our economic capacity. We need one on natural gas. We have enough natural gas to last 200 years.
We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Yes.
At least, and maybe even more than that.
Yeah.
And then you'd help bring manufacturing back to the States. You have all these competitive advantages built in. Natural gas is, just cheaper than it can be right now. But with the hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling, they've found ways to find so much of it. We may never run out of this stuff. It might last for 200 years, and it's very inexpensive, and we can do it, and it's better for the environment.
Yep.
But don't confuse a liberal or a politician with something that makes sense, right now. So that makes sense. Consumption doesn't. Getting more and more people hooked on government dependency, that's where the problem lies. And you know the quote well as I do. I put it in our book From Boom to Bust and Beyond. Andrew Tytler Frazier once said, a democracy lasts until the general populace figures out that they can vote themselves benefits out of the Treasury. And at that point, and I think we've kind of passed that point, Kerby, we're kind of we've gone past the tipping point. The liberal agenda, I think, is going to go full term. And unfortunately, that's going to create a lot of pain for a lot of people. But we have to be, as believers, the ones that come along with the answers, go, yeah, this failed, but it failed because you're doing it wrong. And here's what the Bible says to do economically, morally, financially, etc. But the bottom line is, I think that is going to be a huge problem. The tragedy of it is, if you started to tackle it now and you made some common sense changes, you could probably avert a crisis. You'd have pain, but you wouldn't have a crisis. But if you don't do anything about it and you ignore it and say it's not a big deal, the freight train's coming. It's coming straight down the tracks at you. Well, I feel good. The sun's out. The birds are chirping. There's no problem. Okay, everything's fine. Well, the train is coming straight down the track, and you're standing in the middle of the track. That's what we're facing in that area of the marketplace.
Maybe you'll get to some of this after the break, but there seems to be also in these debates questions about the corporate income tax and about so many jobs going to China and to Mexico. Obviously, creating this natural gas pipeline would be one aspect. But if we just lowered the corporate income tax just a little bit, we have the highest in the world. Right. Don't you think a lot of money would come back to this country?
I do. And you have to treat investors well.
Yes.
Or they will go somewhere else, or their money will go somewhere else. We need to lower the corporate tax rate. Corporations basically collect tax. The corporations then mark it up and sell it to you at a higher cost typically. So we do need to lower that. I know Barry Asmus, a friend of mine, his John Goodman, his cohort at the Center for National Policy in Dallas, went to Ireland a few years ago. But they had a housing bubble, but that's not related to this. But he convinced the Prime Minister of Ireland to lower the corporate tax rate.
I remember when they did that.
They had one of the highest in the world. They lowered it to like 15%. He finally convinced the guy this will eventually produce more tax revenue for your government to spend, and it happened. They had a huge boom. They had an enormous amount of corporate capital from around the world that went to Ireland because it was attractive, because it's like Texas versus the rest of the United States. We don't have a corporate, income tax. We have low tax base, low regulation, and people are coming here because we like to be treated well. Oh, well, you don't like to be poked in the eye with a stick, even though you're paying the taxes for us to live on, but anyway, that's another story for another time.
It certainly is. We'll take a break and we'll come back. And if you'd like to ask a quick question, I know this is one of those ones where you just kind of want to sit back. But if you had some question you wanted to ask about your own finances or about where the economy is going, we'll certainly try to entertain those conversations. And again, let me encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more about cornerstonereport.com. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jerry Tuma with us for just a few more minutes. Again, president and founder of Cornerstone Financial Services. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to look at some of those graphs and charts, again, it's available at cornerstonereport.com, and we have information about it on our website. You can go there directly. And, of course, Jerry, people can talk to you off air because they might want more specifics. And obviously, when you're talking to so many different people, everybody's at a different stage in life.
Right.
They have different requirements in their
Risk
401k or the
tax
IRA
brackets,
or whatever. So there's no way we can possibly cover all of that. But we were going to talk about China, and I mentioned that just a minute ago, and that's one of the things that started that drop.
Right.
But we've got two issues. Issue number one is China owns a lot of our debt, and that's a source of some concern. The argument used to be a long time ago, we don't worry about the national debt because we owe it to ourselves.
Right.
Well, ask the Chinese, the Japanese, the Saudis, the people in the UK. I mean, a lot of other countries besides us own our debt, and that puts us in a vulnerable situation, doesn't it?
It does. And Kerby, if I could give you my opinion on this, which obviously, again, I reserve the right to change my opinion later. You kind of have a short-term outlook on this and a long-term.
Right.
In the short run, I'm not particularly worried about that. The dollar's been strengthening. The old joke is the dollar is the best-looking horse at the glue factory right now. So eventually they all have issues, but we're better off than Europe. We're better off than Japan.
True. Is this still a safe place for money?
Yes, and so money's flowing over here, which is actually part of what's causing the problems in other parts of the world.
Yes.
You have your emerging markets, Turkey, South Africa, Malaysia, Taiwan, all these.
Where would you want to put your money?
All up,
you wouldn't want to put them there.
They're crashing right now.
Yes.
Their currencies are crashing. Their stock markets are going down.
Yes.
And so in the short run, the dollar is more likely to strengthen than weaken for the next 2 or 3 years, I would guess, because we're, again, safer than the rest of the world. And right now our economy we are kind of the anchor of the world economy. Now, the issue, though, with China's been the engine of growth. So they haven't been the anchor. They're the newcomer to the whole thing. And I always say, don't take their training wheels off yet. They haven't quite learned how to do free enterprise, and they're still learning, experimenting as they go. But they've been the engine of the economic growth in the world. And you have all these other emerging markets, again, like Malaysia. And Australia and Canada aren't emerging markets, but they're commodity markets. Their currencies are crashing. Their economies have gone into recession. That's because China, instead of the engine going 60 or 70 miles an hour down or downhill, before they were going downhill at 90 miles an hour. Then they kind of leveled off. Now they're going 60 miles an hour. Now they're going uphill and the wheels are starting to spin. So these other cars had too much momentum. Have you ever driven a tractor behind your car and it picks up momentum? It's going to jackknife anyway. So these other countries are where the trouble is, and they built up enormous debts, external debts. So they're dependent on foreign financing, and a lot of that is dollar denominated. So if their currency goes down 30% in value, which is pretty typical of these emerging market currencies, and you might say, who cares about these countries? Add them all together. Including China, emerging markets last year were almost 50% of world auto sales. If you add them together, they're big. They're actually as big as the United States if they're added together. So it's a big impact on the world economy. And so what's happening again is they built up these huge bubbles of debt, assuming China was going to keep running at 10 or 12% a year. China's slowing. They still say officially 7. I think it's more like 4. So China's not crashing, but it's slowing down radically, and everybody overproduced using debt to try to supply them. And all those train cars are backing up. They're hitting. They're running off the track. So the issue in the short run, I think the dollar will strengthen. These emerging markets are the most difficult, and that's what's going to cause most of the problems in the world economy, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, longer term, that's a different story, because as the boomers get more in the system and we get more problems with the entitlements and stuff like that, the dollar losing its reserve status as the currency of the world is somewhat of an issue. It's potentially a problem. Our national debt to GDP ratio could be an issue, and other people owning our debt will be a problem at some point. I just don't think it's in the next 2 or 3 years. But down the road, again, it's kind of like the train's running our way, and you better jump off the track.
You mentioned a few things about the dollar and what's happening in China, so let's take a caller up in Alaska, KJNP. Go ahead, you're on with Jerry Tuma.
Yes, sir, Mr. Tuma. I haven't heard you discuss yet about where they formed the BRICS and where they're going to boycott the American dollar.
Right.
And where the oil has been locked in with the American dollar, that there could possibly be doing a correction on the American dollar like they did in Mexico. Could you explain to us what BRICS is?
Yes, I can. BRICS it's an acronym that one of the guys at one of the brokerage firms sort of invented, and it's easy to remember BRICS. But Brazil, Russia, India, China. So these are the kind of the 4 horsemen, if you will, of the emerging markets. And what the issue is, China's gone from complete devastation economically under Mao Zedong to the second largest economy in the world. India is not near as big as China yet, but they're growing faster. They have the best demographics of anybody in the world. Brazil, the growing economy, they're in a recession right now. Russia's having a lot of trouble. But again, this is emerging markets. So what has happened is that they've been trying to sort of form some of their own clubs, if you will, to cooperate and trade amongst each other. Partly because they were getting the cold shoulder from the big guys, So the country club guys are turning their nose up at these people. China's going, wait a minute, we're number 2 in the world. We deserve to be in this club with them, and we're kind of giving them brush off. Well, so part of the issue is they really just want, hey, if we can trade together, that will help all of us collectively. Again, China's been setting up the Asian investment bank situation. I mean, if we'd have let them in the World Bank, I mean, they joined the World Trade Organization some years ago, is when their economy really took off. But they're not in the G7. How can you not have China in the G7 if they're number 2 economy in the world? So they're saying, okay, if you're going to treat us badly and we're Cinderella and, we're the stepchild out here, we're going to start our own deal and we'll figure this out. Now, this is part of what bugs me when you read stuff. If you're not careful what you read on the internet, people are saying, well, the dollar's going to go away and China's going to replace us. China's not going to replace the dollar in the near term, maybe not ever. The yuan or the won was 9% of world trade in 2013. That's the most recent stat I have, and the dollar was 81% of world trade. So that doesn't mean we can't have issues with the dollars again in the next decade, but it just means that a lot of what's going on out there is hype that people use to sell their product or their service using scare tactics, which is only marginally based on truth. So you got to be careful what you read. Oil is priced in dollars, so there is some impact there, but the bigger factor is that we overproduce oil. The United States has gone from 9 million barrels a day. When we figured out how to do shale oil and horizontal drilling, we went up as high as 10 million. But the oversupply in the world economy today is only about 2 million barrels of oil a day. It's nothing like the 80s. 24 months from now, this thing's going to flip upside down because now the drilling rigs are going way down. People are stopping the drilling. The debts in the oil industry are coming back to haunt us. And so a few years down the road, I think oil prices are a lot higher again. It's just one of those wild swings based on debt is the biggest factor there.
Again, there's a lot more we could cover, but just about out of time. Let me just mention that this is a Cornerstone report that you're making available, right, and it is the largest one you've ever put together. Make sure, like I said, you have enough paper and ink on your printer because you'll learn quite a bit. And, of course, they can contact you off air as well, can they not? Yes, our number again, Kerby, is 800-327-4285, 1-800-327-4285. And we'll keep that online in case some of you would like to talk off air. But, Jerry, it's always great to have you here. Thank you, Kerby. And as we are coming to the end of the program, just maybe, again, ask yourself, where do you hear this except here on Point of View? And so if you value the things that we talk about here on Point of View, as we mentioned, we have a $50,000 matching challenge. And I really want to challenge some of you to say, I really appreciate the fact that you may be warning us about maybe tough times ahead. And so this might be a way in which you could say thank you by sending a gift. And by doing so, that's a way in which your gift of $50 becomes $100 because of this matching challenge. A gift of $100 becomes $200. So if you've always thought about supporting this ministry, this would be a really good time to do so. Go to our website, pointofview.net, and check on that button that says Matching Challenge. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow.
Please remember September, the month that your gift to Point of View will be doubled. Give $25, it becomes $50. Give $50, it becomes $100. One of the ministry's very special friends wants to motivate you to give, especially if you've never given before. No gift is too little nor too big. Please give generously. Help us equip believers to represent Jesus Christ in this very important and critical hour. Call now and give 1-800-347-5151 or online at pointofview.net. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.